Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective to redefine content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. Today we're speaking with Mike Lackman, the CEO of Trade Coffee Co. Now, Trade Coffee Co. is doing something pretty new and interesting. They have a subscription coffee service that they use their own proprietary software to identify your profile, your flavor profiles. And what they do then is to connect the nation's top roasters directly with customers. And each month you get a fresh bag of coffee that was probably roasted at least just the day before. So interesting concept. Mike, thanks so much. Welcome to the show. Mike, thank you so much today for joining us.
Thrilled to be here.
So you're calling from New York City?
Just outside of New York and New Jersey. Yeah.
Okay, right on. Yeah, I'm based in Manhattan. New York has had quite the startup culture over the last, 5+ years or so. Trade being a new startup, it seems like you're really digging into that. Was it a conscious choice to start here in New York, or in the New York area, I should say?
Yeah, there was a group of the founding team that was here, and obviously there's not only a great talent pool here, but there's a great coffee culture here. And I think it was that the idea came up serendipitously from folks who were here, and that was just the way that they had learned how to build companies, was here in this ecosystem. Yeah, and obviously that's all being challenged now, but that's still a huge part of who we are as a company.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest part. One of the hardest things when you leave New York is and you go to other cities, you're like, I can't find great food, and I get down within walking distance, and I can't find great coffee within walking distance. And I've definitely gotten spoiled. Trade, I think, is doing really interesting things, and the coffee subscription model is I think great. And one, I think, plays into just the curiosity of folks who are interested in trying different things, and then two, it makes our caffeine addiction super easy. To get our fix. So I'm curious what makes Trade different from other coffee brands, coffee subscriptions.
Yeah, sure. Trade's a platform that connects the best craft roasters in the country to consumers who want to make better coffee and are aligned with the values that make our industry tick, our industry being specialty coffee. And so what makes us different from other coffee subscriptions, other coffee companies, coffee shops, whatever way you want to slice the category, it's a really big category, is that we create these experiences that are really deeply personalized, meaning in relatable language, anyone who just wants to make better coffee can be set up with something that is really deeply tailored to them, and then will improve the more they engage with the experience. B is highly modular and really set up to be able to provide you with 100% of the coffee that you need to make at home, which is to say entirely non-discretionary. It's not a jelly of the month club. We have actually 8 different frequency intervals that can be chosen based on different circumstances, different quantities per bag, and we're going to continue to innovate on those kind of things for all the different needs that may come up from a customer's perspective. And then finally, it's really rich in variety. So one of the things we were able to do was take all components that made our industry great, which is that everything that our roasters make is always made fresh on demand. Any of the roasters we work with, there's no warehouse full of brown coffee. There's green coffee waiting to be made. It gets made and it goes out that day. That's the way they do their business. We set you up with access to that on that made on demand basis, but where consumers are able to get this variety of different roasters from different parts of the world, where the green coffee is coming from, different parts of the country and different communities, they're able to support the small businesses that we work with. But that variety is never discretionary. It's guaranteed to fit exactly the way you want it to taste. It's guaranteed, if you need us to grind it for you, to be grounded exactly for the kind of machine that you might use, and the method you might use to brew your coffee. And so you're not forced to make a trade-off between discovery and relevance. There's no risk that you're going to open a bag that comes in the mail and it's not going to be perfect for you. And we feel like we're the only ones doing that. And in doing so, our aim is not so much to say, how do we take on the coffee subscription market or the online coffee market? It is to say, how do we use online to help our roasters solve a problem that grocery, where more than 90% of home coffee is bought, that grocery is structurally incapable of solving for a consumer who needs that problem solved. How do we do that? And subscription just happens to be a really solid way for us to do that in this phase of our business. We don't think it is the entirety of our business by any extreme.
Yeah, of course.
But it's a really effective way for us to solve the problem we're trying to solve right now.
You know, you use the term specialty coffee, and I think coffee reminds me of wine, and that there's a lot of vocabulary, and there's a lot of like, you're either like really into it and you know all the nuances and understand when they say a certain type of bean, what that means, or, you know, roasted a certain way. So what does specialty mean in the terms of in the coffee world? And how are you sort of like working within the between the folks who are like novices or people who are buying their coffee in grocery stores versus those who are like going to like higher end coffee shops and more into the culture there?
So there is actually a formal designation around specialty coffee. There's a Specialty Coffee Association in the United States. There's an International Specialty Coffee Association. It denotes a couple things to keep things simple. One is the quality of the coffee that goes in through that industry. There's a bunch of different ways that it's scored, but let's start by saying there's a certain minimum bar of coffee quality that it takes to be considered specialty by the industry. And then the second is that there are certain ethical standards that are in place, and it can vary based on country of origin and some of the data that's available or some of the different ways that certain kinds of coffees are made or sourced. But overall, it is rooted in a philosophy of very often direct relationships between roasters and the farms from which they source their product. And if not that, then certainly some really well-vetted sets of relationships with importers who can work with different sources of coffee to make sure that value is making it to the growers in order to support a living wage and support their further investment in those crops for the future. The question that we ask ourselves is, how can we, to the point of your question, take what we see there that has so much good in it and help a much larger audience get access to this in a way that's really affordable and approachable and exciting. Our goal was not to be a middleman that kind of parks on an existing industry or rides a wave. Our goal was to say, how can we take this thing that we see so much value in and then look at it, a big consumer market where it's only really specialty or premium about 10% of the time in most homes, despite how successful out-of-home coffee shops are, despite the way they shop for so many other things in their lives. How can we help this much larger audience see the value in this thing, ascribe value to it, and how can we more efficiently then push that value up the chain to the roasters and the growers who make it happen?
So what do you think that 10% is about? If you have, say, 10% of coffee drinkers are buying specialty brands or specialty beans, is that an access? Is it a cost? Is it sort of that knowledge of what that means? What do you think that is saying?
It's a really central question for us, right?
Yeah.
And I think in some ways there's a simple way to define specialty, which is that it's also non-commodity. And you think about how many things in our lives have stopped being kind of naked or blank commodities. Soup in a can, white bread, like all these things that were part of the generation that was kind of dying when I was a kid and is now kind of completely gone in a lot of ways. Coffee is interesting in that it still sort of behaves in that space. It's not that way at all out of home. 50% of the coffee that's purchased out of home is really high end and premium and has all these different things around provenance. But when you look at the way people describe the coffee beans, people talk about them like they're tobacco. Most people are bold, strong, mild, robust. Like I don't know how to say which of our coffees are more mild or robust than one another. There's a barrier where the drinks, the machines, the shops, the additives are what make coffee premium. But the beans, there's just this kind of mess of Arabica and all these different jargony words where when we can talk to people and use data to merchandise our assortment in language that's really approachable and then gives us really actionable insights to set people up with something that we know is just going to knock their socks off, you can then take that commodity experience and apply this sort of Dorothy coming out of the house, going into Technicolor, let's see what's different here, without it being, I'm going to turn you into a coffee nerd. And that's really the secret to what we're trying to build. We want to take the best parts of this industry and help them do what they do in a way that's accessible to, but also earns love by a really massive audience.
Mm-hmm. Now you're doing that through, I guess, the personalization quiz that's on the site. I actually took it myself just to see what would be recommended. It was super easy. And I'm really curious to how that like personalization technology works. Does that have an AI side to it, or is this mapped out ahead of time where certain answers are going to? It's kind of like guide your own story. Those old school books where you like set, the answer sets you up as already predetermined.
So the short story is that it's all about data quality.
Yeah.
I heard a great joke from a data scientist about a year ago, which is that if people talk about AI or machine learning or big data, it's a little bit like the way that teenagers talk about sex. Mm-hmm. Most of them aren't actually doing it. The ones who are doing it probably aren't doing it that well yet. Mm-hmm. Everybody talks about these things. It starts with really, really, really high quality, really flat data. And so our quiz is built not because we know there's some, we found the enzymes and certain kind of things and they relate to citrus. And it's actually more, what can we know about people that's really actionable, that's simple enough that we can acquire a lot of that information, meaning there's a small number of questions that tell us a lot. And then how can we combine that with data that we have that's flat and accurate about the coffees we sell? One of our most important functions as a company, we have a director of coffee. He and his team actually cup, which is a type of tasting, every coffee we sell according to a process that we built and ascribed about 30 proprietary points of metadata to every coffee we sell that we really know in specific and actionable terms how it tastes. And in a couple months, we'll end up selling our 4 millionth bag in our first couple of years of business. When you have 4 million points of data that tell you, okay, people that say this about what they want and then get coffees that taste like that, do you earn their loyalty? Yeah. And that insight is at the core. Now, are we doing smarter and smarter things with ML and machine learning to be able to ask different questions to different people, tweak the offerings, adapt to their ratings? Absolutely. But it starts with just a really high quality set of dense, flat data that helps us really put the customer in charge by seeing if they trust us enough with what we do for them to let us send them their next bag of coffee.
There's always the part where people say they think they say what they mean, and then their action says otherwise, right? I'm curious how that plays in the coffee and what you're seeing. Are you seeing that people say they like bold coffee, and then what they end up tasting is not bold? Or I'm curious what the difference is there.
Yeah, my favorite example of this actually is a question that we still ask, but it tells us less and less the smarter we get. We ask people how much they know about specialty coffee. And more often than not, that just tells us if we're talking to a man or a woman, because overwhelmingly men say they know a lot about coffee and then may actually in their coffee indicate that they don't know that much about specialty. Or we have a preponderance of people who, just from an anonymized Google Analytics perspective, tend to be female, indicate with the kind of coffee they like that they know a lot about it, but actually say, hey, I could learn more about it. And so that's a great example of a question that early on
ego is amazing. Yeah, ego is amazing in how it dictates our answers and questions and the way we perceive ourselves. It's incredible. So all that sounds really highly technical, and I'm curious how that evolves. Right? Do you have data scientists on your team? Do you have people who are just really focused on streamlining the data sets and figuring out and assigning these sort of metadata marks to the each coffee tasting? I'm curious how all that works in an ecosystem within a business to stay efficient and not just bog the whole machine down.
So from a process perspective, and this was the thing that we kept breaking and rebuilding and just had a hard time getting momentum on early on. We really thought that we'd be able to work with roasters to have them tell us about their coffees in ways that we could use that information to do this dynamically. And we found early on that it was just so inconsistent that it wasn't about smarter data scientists. It was just about better quality source data. So the first process we have to have, and one of the most important things that happens at Trade, is that when we work with a roaster, they're sending us their roasts. One thing that a lot of people don't know about specialty is that actually it's very ephemeral. our assortment can turn over as much as 5% a month just with seasonality. There are certain coffees from East Africa that hundreds of different farms are going through a single washing station. So you're only going to get that lot of coffee once ever. And so we're always tasting these new coffees. And then there's the factor of how it's roasted by the roaster, which can completely change the flavor profile. Being able to get that data right systematically and then understand what audience of consumers really would love that coffee, and then get that data back to roasters so they understand with the products they're creating, what percentage of the audience we're reaching are they really selling to. That was the first loop that was really hard to close. But now that we've built some momentum around that, that's really something that's pretty sustainable. Now, we do have roughly 10% of our payroll is data science. And the big thing that they do is very much like a software company. We look for high value activities. What are the things that we've seen that have really high value? How can we have one mistake, meaning a person who says, oh, I hated this, teach us as much as possible about as many other people as possible so we can learn from that really quickly? And then how can we build some elements like things that are derived in machine learning into the way that we either seamlessly behind the scenes or transparently through UX with our customers take what they do with us and use it to make their experience way better. And I think that's more of a simple process, which is just smart people looking for gold in the river, right? Looking for things that have high value and then trying to do a lot more of it really quickly.
And so I assume a mistake is considered like missing out on a coffee that they like. So hearing back from a customer like, oh, I didn't like this one. Is that what you're considering a mistake, or is it broader and it could be anywhere from like shipping or canceling a subscription? How are you like sort of defining that idea? It's
much broader. And I actually think that I say that with confidence because we got that wrong so many times. It is everything. It is, did it show up on time? Did I like the bag? Like anything that ultimately builds up to, do I trust you for the next one? That's all the business is about. And I would say one of the toughest lessons we learned, I actually am kind of like a failed Latin teacher from past life, but there's this ancient Greek saying that's really important, which is know thyself, is the thing that's written on the Oracle at Delphi. Because when they read you the Oracle, you may actually interpret it in a way that's not meant to be interpreted. Know who you are before you start thinking what you're told, right?
I love that.
We were so focused on how hard it was to get matching right that I think to a degree, and still to an extent, we are still doing this, I think in ways we can improve upon, we made everything about the matching. In reality, it's a super critical component, but if you don't keep in mind what it really means to a customer in that moment, there's just a hammer everything's a nail side to these things. And you get into this habit of trying to solve everything by making the matches better. And you can overlook, well, was it showing up on time? Or would they like a way to change the frequency with which they get things more easily? It's really important that you keep empathizing with the customer and really listen to what they're saying, and that you know yourself, that you don't try to turn everything into the thing that you think makes you special. It's only differentiating for the customer if it's the reason they would say it's different. Not if it's like the thing that happens to be different that you think you've built. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really key insight, what you just said. It's funny. So we have two dogs. You may hear them messing around on my desk right now, but two large dogs. And we subscribed to I don't want to say the name of the brand, but just a food service for them, human quality food delivered every couple weeks. And on one of the packages, it was mislabeled with the dog's name, and it said it was a certain, it says like beef when it was really like chicken. You could tell just by looking at it. And that destroyed our trust in the brand. And I hate to say it, but we stopped working with them because it was such a kind of a big error when you're messing with dietary requirements and restrictions with your pets. But I think that maintaining that customer trust is so huge because it's shattered so quickly. So I think really taking that wider approach of what a mistake is, and making sure you're still hitting on those trust factors like delivery times, it is super important. And I'm curious, is that a result in just a lots of communication with your customers? Are you getting this feedback because you're consistently pulling them? Or are you finding that they are just already verbal and reaching out to you? And are they doing this through like the website or social media? I'm really curious what that conversation is like and how it's happening.
So one, it's from every angle.
Yeah.
And the first thing that you have to know is the number one way they speak is with their dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the most reliable signals is what happened and did they cancel or did they keep buying? Because frankly, a lot of customers will give us credit for, oh, what you're doing seems really hard, so I don't want to give you a hard time. It just didn't quite show up on time. But it's actually pretty cool that it comes. Like they almost don't want to say, hey, why'd this show up a day late?
Yeah.
But that may be why they cancel. And so at the start, the least subjective thing we can look at is just, did things happen and were customers loyal? Mm-hmm. And as we've gotten bigger, we have more statistically significant data to look at that. Mm-hmm. That said, the qualitative side is really important. And what gets really important there is, and this is where that know thyself thing comes back again, our customers are really segmented. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to help this industry reach a much bigger audience than they have historically, to reach the folks in New York and San Francisco, but then also to find the folks that live in a cul-de-sac outside of Indianapolis, mm-hmm. whose best options are like a Red Robin and a Chili's and a Longhorns, mm-hmm. and want something better. And they want to have mm-hmm. that Bushwick experience or that mm-hmm. Mission experience. Mm-hmm. They all look at things differently. Mm-hmm. And what you don't want to do is say, well, this is what I think makes us special. This is what I think drives us with differentiation because we've seen it anecdotally. And so when this customer cancels, it's probably because we didn't do enough of that thing we said we were going to do more of. Mm-hmm. You have to really understand what makes these different people tick. And one of the hardest things to do is to be focused enough on a small enough number of those personas mm-hmm. that you don't drive yourself crazy, because you can only do a couple things really well, especially at the beginning of a business.
Mm-hmm. So with that, you have these various personas, obviously. I'm curious, like, what that customer journey is like then. Are they mm-hmm. are they discovering you because they're trying to look for more sustainable coffee options? I imagine there's a sort of a mix there between those who are like actively seeking new products and those that may stumble upon you accidentally. And so I'm curious what that's like for. I mean, I'm sure segmented, but I would just love to hear some of that strategy.
I think it starts with a unique customer insight, which is we do really well with a customer who has a desire to upgrade or level up their coffee, knows there's something out there, is aware of specialty, but doesn't really know what makes it tick. May actually go to specialty shops. My town here in New Jersey, there's a third wave or a craft roaster right across the street from a Starbucks. And you can mm-hmm. just sit on the street and watch which people go left and which people go right and look at mm-hmm. the kind of ways they shop. Mm-hmm. We do really well when somebody has some of that curiosity. Mm-hmm. And we have a joke that Dunkin' Donuts is a huge company. Very few people are walking out of there and just like throwing their cup on the ground in disgust. And be like, who's going to solve this problem for me? This is terrible. Like there's a lot of really loyal, happy customers there. And there were a lot of people in the cheap seats at stadiums in 1995 who would have given cold beer a 95 MPS rating. Yeah. The question is, like, where does that curiosity start? We generate some of it, but we do benefit from a larger wave of people questioning things. As some of these SKUs start to show up in grocery outlets, they're starting to wonder, well, I saw that thing there. Should I be buying this? What is it? Why do I pick one? And when we can tap into that and then provide a story around supporting small business, getting something that's really fresh and deeply personalized easily, mm-hmm. and then being able to get value out of that experience, whether it's free shipping or savings or any other ways that we try to earn customer loyalty and trust, the right mix of all those things coming together is where the genesis of a good customer journey starts for us. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's about really successful trial, meaning giving them a reason to try it, but setting a high enough bar that we're willing to work really hard to try to earn that customer's trust. Mm-hmm. Meaning you can't just give free bags away and hope the thing sells itself. Mm-hmm. And then from there, continuing to reacquire or re-earn that customer over time, because we are so, I mean, the vast majority of the cases, we get like $10 or $15 from a customer in gross revenues when we meet them. We need to earn many multiples on that to be successful. And so if we're not constantly earning into their 15th, 18th, 20th, 30th, 40th bag of coffee over a lifetime, the whole other side we were talking about for the last 5 minutes is kind of worthless.
Yeah, totally.
So investing adequately against those things is really where we build a business.
Yeah, and it's interesting you highlight story, because I think stories, I mean, it's important in marketing, but anytime you talk about something that's like handmade, I would say like coffee, when you're out in the fields, there's a family, there could be a family aspect to it, a brand aspect to it. And it again reminds me of the wine business, in that it's so much of the hype sometimes is really around the story. I'm sure they make great products and they make fantastic, coffee or wine or whatnot, but some of that allure and I think attraction, it really is built into like, what is this farm doing individually that's different from others? What makes their bean special? How is it grown? Where is it grown? So when your customers order, are they getting a write-up, if you will, or some sort of information about like, this is where your coffee's from, this is what they're about?
Yeah. I mean, and the couple ways that we do that, especially to make the model work, is first and foremost, you have this really unbelievable piece of art, which is the bag that you get from that particular roaster. And I mean, it really is an album cover. It's the thing that drew, I'm not a founder of the business. It's the thing that really pulled me in, was that it felt like our generation's version of vinyl. Like there's something to this that's just, and we'll see customers actually frame the bags they get from us after 6 months as a collage and go, look at this art I created with all the different bags I got. So I think that's a big one. We obviously complement that then through the new user conversion funnel, and then through our CRM efforts, whether it's email comms or our blog articles that we integrate into. We're increasingly using QR to try to bring people into that digital experience after experiencing something physical, that we try to connect on that. But I also think it's one of those places that, as you're a new business and you're trying to figure out where to invest and how to put content together and how prominent to make it, we think we can do a lot more of. We know it's a big part of the opportunity. And I'll tell you that I do think there's a music to coffee. I think there's something really special about our industry, and all the like data science-y kind of stuff aside, I love solving big retail problems, but there's just something about the music of this. Like when you ask what makes us different than subscription clubs, some of the wine club people will say like, why do you need our data? Well, I think it's really stupid that customers pick wines based on what the label looks like. And I hate that sentiment. I mean, the White Album is the White Album because it was white. Like Sgt. Pepper's, the art is part of what makes that the album. You never hear Nirvana say the word Nirvana. The name of who they are and the naked baby in the pool all make that thing, and those songs in that order, something really special. It's not just clinical, I heard this music and it gave me dopamine and now I'm on to the next song. Like those trappings are actually probably more than half of the value. And I think that's what makes these folks so special, that it's not just the next thing I picked up at the grocery store and I'll give, like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone, like maybe I'll give it a whirl. Like there's something to this that you can be invested in. And then that's where you don't have to be a nerd to really enjoy it, to like the fact that this week I got a coffee from Appalachia. They're the largest employer in their little town. It's this roaster we work with called Red Rooster in Floyd, Virginia. They actually have a daycare center on site.
Oh, that's cool.
And now I can imagine this like hippie commune in the middle of this like super rural part of Virginia in the mountains. And these guys made a bag of coffee for me this morning. And when the bag shows up, it says, this coffee was made for you.
Yeah. I mean, I can get behind that. Like knowing that helps me just from a buyer's perspective, get excited and behind the brand. And I think that's brilliant to include and make a huge part of it. I'm curious to how you're choosing your channels then. So you have your customer journey and it's segmented, of course. And I'm curious to like then how you're choosing whether to use influencers versus paid search versus social media ads, and I know this changes in Apple recently have definitely impacted or influenced marketers' choices for social media ads. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you're choosing those channels and the logic there.
So short story is that there's an interesting insight for our business. We're one of the few businesses where a picture is really not worth 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. It's actually not great. Narrative's mm-hmm. better for us because we can't just show you a picture of one of the bags you might get and explain it's actually a curation of different roasters and they're all made freshly. Like a picture says very little about what our company does. So plain picture ads, paying people to just throw a picture in their Instagram feed as an influencer or something makes a lot less of an impact for us than a swimwear brand or something like that, where it really is that really kind of tells the story. It's an outdoor brand and there's a fly fishing guide doing something with it or something it tells about. That said, I think we've always tried to take a pretty diversified approach in that we're not an arbitrage business. We're not trying to find some exploit. Not to say that we aren't crazy tactical at times, but we're building multi-year, lifelong relationships with consumers. We're figuring out how to make the payback on that as efficient as possible, but it is a long game we're trying to play. And that means we think we need to have the ability to kind of fish in different ponds. And so we've always been pretty diversified around it. But certainly when there's volatility around those things, it makes you then retrench, break things open, question things. I don't think we saw nearly the volatility that some other brands saw around some of the iOS stuff. Partly because we've always had a philosophy of not paying the platforms to match for us. We try to advertise as broadly as we can within a broad set of guardrails and then use the site to personalize our outcomes, as opposed to saying, let me really spearfish for these hyper-targeted audiences.
Yeah, you already have the data sets, really. I mean, I didn't really make those connections until you said that. That's really quite smart. And I love that approach. You aren't then leaning on these big platforms. You sort of there's a lot of power in that. It makes total sense.
Within a band, right? I mean, the platforms have a lot of power, and I don't think this gets discussed
much. Of course they do.
But like one of the big powers they have, it's not about demo, in my opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just who spends your price point in your category. So they know which people wake up, sit on the toilet and look at Instagram for 15 minutes and buy something 3 days a week. And that's a big part of what they're charging you for.
Yep. Okay. That's really interesting. So then I'm curious, so are you taking sort of your data sets that you already have, knowing on your existing customers and sort of like, I hate to use the word like lookalike audience, and then using sort of like a lookalike audience to help, harness the power of the platforms then to hone in on those folks? Or I'm curious to how that stuff's going to is translating over then.
Well, let me be super transparent, right? Because I think this is something we also needed to get better at. We've been really successful by keeping things pretty broad, putting some pretty broad guardrails around things, keeping CPMs pretty low, and then being able to personalize on site because coffee can be pretty universal. What I think that's prevented us from getting great at and having a lot of conviction around are some really key concentrated affinity groups that we feel like we can just own. And it's not to say that we're going to use proprietary data to be able to create some quantcast match or something like that. It's more to say, what are those interest groups? And it's not as readily apparent as you might think. It's not just anything culinary is always a great fit for us or something like that. But who are those interest groups that really disproportionately fit with what we're trying to do? And how can we take some seemingly irrational or even opaque payback assumptions, but have conviction that owning brain space, meaning just earning their credibility as a brand that's worthy of a shot from them, that they'd want to work with as a consumer with their hard-earned dollars, that's actually something I think we need to get a lot better at. And so when you ask me about like, hey, things are changing, the Facebook, iOS changes, where you're going to find audience, like, I think we look at our future as being, how do we take what we've built from a performance perspective? How do we take what we've built where more than 1 in 3 of our customers hear about us from a friend, and that number continues to go up as we improve the product, and then press those advantages to be able to say, now we're going to bet on things that may have a longer payback, that may have a less clear immediate attribution story, but where in the long run, being one of the 5 or 6 brands that this group of people really know about and respect is just insanely valuable. Let's be really focused, because we don't have the money to do that 20 times, and find success by doing that, and then see if we can repeat that cycle.
Totally building that, basically building your own community, and then I think growing that. And what I love about it is it's so dangerous to get so locked into one channel or one business. Like, Facebook is arguably a monopoly, and leaning on them seems really dangerous to acquire customers and being like your primary channel. So I think, that approach, though, even though it can be scary, or this big unknown, I think there's a lot of value in doing that for the long term. And I'm curious how that translates then to your influencers, because you're talking about coffee is sort of a broad spectrum of people, right? Everyone, I would say almost everyone I know drinks coffee, right? So, but as we've been talking and discussing, those you take your 10 friends, are all become segmented in how their relationship with it, how they approach it, how they drink it, how they buy it. With that in mind, and then you have the influencer side. So are you finding people are you trying to appeal and find influencers to have sort of a broader market, or are they getting a little bit more specific and trying to build out that community like you just talked about a bit, like, honing in like really who those top users are?
Yeah, I think it is the latter, right? And I think that's where influencers is a cool channel where you can experiment with a lot of those different communities in real time. Influencer's been a huge thing for us. I mean, it's been a place where we've put literally millions of dollars, despite being a pretty scrappy and pretty conservatively funded business for our scale, just because it has tremendous potential. And because we also think that narrative is so important to telling our story. When people can show up as really, like in the old sense of the term, really qualified leads, meaning someone they trust told the story and they found it compelling. Yeah. We don't need to be going through the like, oh God, this looks great, but on mobile, it's like above the fold and there's not that much room and how much time. Yeah. Like they come in understanding the pitch, right? Yeah. That's really valuable, especially from a tail perspective. We're finding that the long tail on people who heard about us from an influencer they trust 9 months ago is just way bigger than we could have estimated. That's great. And so I think that the other piece, though, from an organization perspective, and you've asked this question a couple of times, like how do you build a process around that that's sustainable? Yeah. So many things in this early stage are about confidence and trust. And I think you have to build an apparatus to give your teams or the folks that are focusing on this the trust and the confidence to take bets. An influencer, it's a really good example of a thinking in bets approach. Trying not to lose will get you really just wiped out there, because you'll have a lot of misses. And the bigger you want to play in that channel, some of these folks, it's not where it was 3 years ago, where these are kids in their basement doing YouTube videos. I mean, these folks are being represented by William Morris and CAA. Yep, I know. Like, it's a whole new world. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's expensive. It can be expensive, right? And so there's like this level of trust. I think we see this with our clients sometimes, and when we talk about influencing their influencer strategy, is like, I think a lot of times when they start seeing how much money they're spending on it, there's this level of trust almost disappears in some ways, because they want even more control, versus like, I feel like the influencer has already established established their, I guess, ability to create creative content, communicate with their audience in a specific way that resonates with them. So there's like this level of like, okay, just turning it over and letting them do their thing. Has that been hard for you? Is there a level of like, just do your thing, or are you guys trying to be more, I guess, directed and it's very specific with your influencers and how they spin off? Like, you may have like a concept or an approach to something, and they may be able to build on that or just execute it. So I'm just curious what those relationships are like then for you, since it's become such a huge part of your marketing.
So I wouldn't say it's a very cool sounding answer to be like, nah, man, the key is just let them do their thing. Don't get
Of
in the
course,
way.
that's what everyone always wants to hear, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think the guardrails we don't put up 50 different demands.
Yeah.
I think the thing for us is what we don't invest money in is letting people talk about coffee in ways that we just don't sell coffee.
Mm-hmm.
We don't sell coffee as a drug.
Mm-hmm.
We don't sell like, man, you're going to get addicted to it anyway. Let's do it. There are certain things where if you want, people need to make sure they understand that this is about making awesome coffee, that it's accessible to anybody. It's not just for coffee nerds, and some basic tenets of our core value proposition. And as opposed to just thinking about t-shirts at the beach, instant human, just add coffee, kind of like coffee nonsense kind of stuff, which some people, if they're just trying to bang out spots, can fall into because it's easy. So I would say that there is a kind of a guardrail for us there, but it's about, back to that notion of focus, picking one or two things that matter and being like, hey, this matters to us. Do you understand? And if they say yes, then trust them and let them do that however they want. Because what you can't do is give them a script. The authenticity falls apart in a second if it looks like people are just getting their bag.
Become an announcer, basically. Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more with that. And the whole acquisition and like finding influencers is a whole nother game. And I'm sure you have a whole marketing team dedicated to that. But how does that work? Do you guys, and I asked that for brands who are listening, who haven't necessarily had that experience where they've been apprehensive about the influencer route and how it works, or if it works. I think is often the big question mark, not how it works, but the if. And I think this is a great case study where it has worked. So what's that process like then for your team as far as like finding the right ambassadors, right? How are you vetting them so they're making sure they're not saying things that aren't brand aligned before, or there's a level of risk there, I think, just to make sure that they are completely representative of the values of the brand, not just speaking to a specific audience, right?
Totally. No, I mean, and we learned that lesson the hard way early on. I mean, I think vetting is really important. We've tried to simplify down to, and when I talk about trust, I was actually even talking just internally. Yeah, you need to create people who are confident to spend a certain amount of money and maybe get zero back for it because it's part of a portfolio that just makes sense. And if you make a bunch of good bets, some of them are going to look really bad in isolation, and they need to feel comfortable having those misses on the board. So I think that's actually the key, is creating that top risk tolerance, as opposed to make all this work but don't lose any of them. Then you're just going to grind yourself into dust. I think, but I think the other piece of it that's really important is being able to understand, not if I get this one and then this one and then this one, I can just barely make my month, and then I get as many things as I want, and then I move on to the next one. I'll find another channel. This is a loop, and market, product, channel, model, fit needs to get recreated for every new channel. The landing experience, the proposition, the promo, those things, there's nothing, none of these things are public plug and play. So the best case when you're starting is, I'm going to find some green shoots, but now I need to know if it's worth my time to build the next piece on top of it. The best case is I find piece one of 4 pieces that will come together to really build a channel for us. If you get all that stuff right, then I think it gives you the opportunity to explore a bit, take some risk, and then say, it's more about over a year. Do I put this many dollars to work with an average of this kind of performance, reach this many people? And then do I feel good about the wins, the losses, everything all together, the best portfolio of all that? And then the sooner you can get clarity around what good looks like there and whether everybody on board is ready to take a bet, the easier it is to set expectations with the customer service team, so that they're encouraged by the momentum when, hey, we're going to have an influencer launch. Yup, traffic's way up. Great, it's working. Or the board, which, hey, maybe you have a really lousy month because this is going to be one of those ones that didn't work. You're not trying to scramble to explain to your investors why that's the case. Everybody goes in knowing we made this bet together. This is strategically relevant. And some of these months are going to look lousy if we take a big swing and one of them misses.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hardest part to get right, especially when you're moving really quickly and trying to make decisions on the fly.
Yeah. Well, I think calling out your customer service side of that is really important in an area where businesses sometimes overlook, especially just and there's so many great stories coming out of the pandemic of how customer service became a new way to connect with their customers in a really authentic and like meaningful way, almost as someone who are building sort of a relationship facilitator. We're really being that voice of creating that relationship with the customer, making sure they feeling understood, heard, and then resolving that issue. And so I think that's one, just awesome that it's already top of mind for you guys, thinking about how the customer service side can handle it, sort of any sort of disruptions or issues in the overall strategy, and sometimes it's overlooked. And some of the things we've talked about today, you've mentioned a lot about, this didn't quite work at first. We took a shot, we learned this from it, but wasn't what we intended. And as we close and get on finish up the episode, I'm really curious to how you could talk to, or if you can talk to an instance where you had a great learning. It was like a big mistake that you learned from, and like almost like giving yourself advice from, your younger self. Maybe you should have done this, or if you're going to do this, do it this way. I would love to hear if there's any instances that come straight to mind.
Yeah, I think definitely early on in our business, and this is common with marketplace businesses, you're trying to satisfy a customer with an offering that's really not good enough yet because there's not enough demand to make the suppliers really excited. And you're trying to get your suppliers excited about doing a great job for customers, but there's not enough volume to really get them motivated to do anything differently or do it. So holding all that together is really hard. And at certain points, your job is not to let any of those things really go wrong, because any of them can kind of sink you. And so I think the first piece of advice is, and I think that the rate of change slows as the business matures, but across the first couple of years and first few phases of the business, it's almost like playing 3 or 4 different sports. And back to that notion of knowing yourself, you can get so into this one phase where it's like, I'm playing hockey. It's crazy. It's fast. Everyone's hitting each other. We're on skates. And it's like, it's not that anymore. So stop acting like you're skating around at 20 miles an hour and hitting people, because this is basketball and you're not supposed to do that. Like John Travolta in Grease just starts punching people the first time he plays basketball. I think the biggest mistakes I made were when you just got so into putting all of yourself into the right thing to do is to do it this way, that you didn't realize the sport had changed. You raise money, you have some more resources. Now, how do I invest in the team more aggressively, where we ought convinced ourselves before we didn't have the resources for that. And I think the barometer of whether you're doing those things well, it's just the whole thing is this currency of trust. Like when I think about a CEO, which is the job I have, the management team you work with, the company as an extension of all those things, together working as a team, the job of, and the more this becomes more and more central the higher up the ladder you go, like it just becomes about earning everyone's trust. If you can earn your customers' trust, they'll give you a chance. They might even overlook a mistake that you make from time to time. If you need to get them to earn your trust in spite of your mistakes, it's insanely expensive. Get your suppliers to trust you, because then they'll come up and they'll tell you, hey, Mike, what if we did it this way? It was smarter. Or what if we came up with a new SKU that we could do, as opposed to making them do it because they don't really trust you and then charging them back or something. And then certainly your employees, do they really trust you so much that even when you, as a team, as a leader, if you're a manager of 2 people, if you're a CEO of 200 people, 2,000 people, come up with this idea, if that trust is earned, and I've been on the wrong side of this as many times as I've been on the right side of it. You can even say something that comes from the right place, but isn't said right. Or maybe it's aimed in the wrong direction. And it's the difference between going like, yeah, that's not a great idea, but I see where he's coming from. And people going like, Jesus Christ, what's he talking about? Right. And I think you can have the stenographer read it back and you're like, well, this wasn't that bad. And the answer usually is their trust there. And so the job at the beginning, there's just no overage of energy or dedication you can put toward who are these key constituents I need to connect with? Consumers, suppliers, if it's a sales team and a sales business, like any of those key constituents. For us, it's roasters, consumers, team. Mm-hmm. How do we earn their trust, empower them to be able to make an impact, make them feel supported, and mm-hmm. then take what we listen to from that trusting relationship and build things that we earn value from with them. Mm-hmm. That's the whole cycle. And I think where we've done it well, we've been successful. And when we haven't done it well, it's this brutal, painful reminder of how important it is to do it well every time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, at least if just from the way we've been speaking today and the way you approach the business, that transparency is really, and openness is really part of creating, I think, some of that trust between either your customers or whether it's your own employees and team, and just being an empathetic and straight shooter. It seems like, I think, is one thing I took away from some of your leadership abilities or leadership insights, I guess you could say, insights into good leadership. And so, yeah, with that, thank you so much. I think like for me, this was super knowledgeable or interesting. I learned a lot. And I really thank you for taking the time today and coming on and speaking with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun to be here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Well, thank you all so much for spending your last hour with us. I hope you are leaving feeling inspired and having learned something. Please head on over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. And I'll see you all next week.